Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you had a good morning and a very nice lunch and are ready and full of energy for the second part of today here at IFAD, Nutrition Day. And I would like to introduce the president of IFAD, Alvaro Lario, to take the floor. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, Excellencies, dear friends. Welcome to IFAD. We were yesterday at FAO with our colleagues. Today we are here at IFAD celebrating the Rome Nutrition Week. We have been discussing about the importance of nutrition. We all know that malnutrition especially is one of the most complex challenges that we have, and that some of the figures that have been repeated across the week, and that will also be repeating given the importance, we are all aware, which is 1 in 3 of us cannot afford a healthy diet, or nearly 150 million children under the age of 5 being stunted. So these figures are clearly still very alarming. The lost cost in terms of economic cost that I also mentioned yesterday, 3.5 trillion, where it's lost earnings, lost opportunities, healthcare costs are also massive. So I'm glad here to welcome you, to have a discussion and an important effort to drive a cross-sectoral, innovative and strategic collaboration among the Rome-based agencies and also the rest of the partners in the room. Let us begin with the truth that we all know: malnutrition is not inevitable. It is a human-made crisis, and that means that we can also solve it. The good news, which we all are aware, is that investing in nutrition can also prevent further cost along the line. It's from a ratio of 1 to $23. So $1 invested in nutrition can give us up to $23 in terms of social return. IFAD is at the crossroad and at the cross intersection of agriculture, rural finance and development. 85% of our country strategies are now around food systems. We have supported more than 60 national pathways, focusing very much on nutrition. So we know how the cycle works. Poverty is driving malnutrition, and malnutrition is deepening poverty. So in order to truly defeat malnutrition, we need to also invest small-scale farmers and make sure that they are able to produce affordable and accessible nutritious food. We have to also strengthen the link between producers and consumers, which will enable a number of gains that we are aware, like affordable, nutritious food, and also increase of farmers' income. And this is how we move from a fragmented program or fragmented intervention to a full circle of solutions. Because malnutrition, and this is for the panel of today, does not exist in isolation. It is connected to poverty, inequality, climate change, and weak infrastructure. So to solve it, we also require the cross-sectional investments that we will be discussing together, working together, aligning policies, attracting financing, and this is our approach, also with our new approach to private sector investments, whereby we are trying to support them in mobilizing further investments through de-risking, blending finance, new platforms, and including it also in all of our country strategies and our country programs, trying to make sure that also the private sector can be a solution for investing in nutrition. Let me conclude by saying that the fight against malnutrition requires the innovation and the partnerships that we are bringing today together, and today's panel is a good opportunity to share the lessons, challenge some of these assumptions, and also build the momentum, and to seize the moment to ensure that good nutrition is not only a privilege, but a right for every person everywhere. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for those remarks. I'm now happy to introduce Her Excellency Ambassador Patricia Chizanga Kondolo, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, the permanent representative of Zambia, who will moderate the first segment of this event. Please.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, for your welcome remarks and for inspiring us with your intervention. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to start this event, co-led by IFAD and IFC, with the aim of fostering a dialogue of public and private sector investments that are required to tackle nutrition. I will be your moderator for this event and will have two segments. One focused on public sector financing for better nutrition outcomes, followed by the second segment dedicated to nutrition-sensitive impact financing in the private sector. Let's start with the first part of the event. I will cover the work of international development organizations and governments and how they catalyze investments in nutrition-sensitive solutions across agriculture, health, education in a multi-sectoral approach. Before I introduce the panelists, some housekeeping information. Let me welcome all participants connected online. We have 4 panelists for this first segment, followed by a question and answer session. All microphones in the virtual audience are muted for participants connected online. Please use the question and answer box to ask your questions. The honorable panelists that we have today, whom I wish to welcome, are Ms. Kefilwe Mwalosi, who is a Senior Program Officer, Nutrition and Food Safety for the African Union Development Agency. Mr. Juan Carlos Mendoza, Director, Environment, Climate, Gender and Social Inclusion Division, IFAD. Mr. Lawrence Haddad, who is the Executive Director for GAIN, who is also connected online. And Mr. Joel Mokhtar, Director of Wellspring Development, connected online as well. I kindly remind you that you have 6 minutes for your intervention. May I also wish to acknowledge that Ms. Ashhan Khan, hope I pronounced that correctly, Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations and coordinator of the Scaling Up Nutrition movement, will close the event after the second panel. Therefore, without further ado, let's start with our first panelist, Kefilwe, who will highlight effective models for integrating nutrition financing across sectors. You have the floor, Kefilwe.
Greetings and thank you so much, Honorable. Thank you so much for introducing me. Greetings everyone from South Africa and happy Africa Month. As you have alluded, I'll be talking about effective models for integrating nutrition financing across sectors. Next slide, please. For us, the African Union Development Agency, we are using the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, which is CAADP, as our framework to promote investments in nutrition and food security in Africa. We are guided by the Agenda 2063 that has 7 aspirations. And aspiration number 1 is focusing on a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. And looking at goal number 3, which is about having a healthy and well-nourished citizens in Africa. That's what drives the development of nutrition in Africa. And we're ensuring that our aspirations within the Agenda 2063 is actually aligned with the global frameworks as well, such as the SDGs, especially SDG 2 on ending hunger and achieving food security and nutrition. We also ensure that United Nations food systems processes at country level are also aligned with these aspirations of the CAADP and the synergy in terms of better implementation on the ground within countries in AU. Next slide, please. Now, within this framework, there's a commitment that actually speaks to enhancing investment and financing in agriculture. Our heads of states actually have committed to 10% of annual public spending to agriculture and food security. This is on the current Malabo, which is actually ending in 2025, December this year. But we have realized that these member states haven't allocated national budget. 10% of what they're committed to agriculture hasn't been done. The member states are still struggling in terms of domestic financing to really invest in agriculture and food security. And also there are also other challenges that they're experiencing, such as the conflicts that are happening in Africa, as well as some climate change, For example, in the Southern Africa, last year we had El Nino that really affected some of the investments that were actually earmarked to improve agriculture and food security. We encourage the member states also to invest in private sector investments and also look into agribusiness and prioritizing local investors within the African member states. Next slide, please. Now, with the new Kampala CAADP, which is another framework that we are focusing on for the next 10-year implementation, which is going to commence in 2026 to 2035, we are really prioritizing driving resources and mobilizing partnerships to support the implementation on the ground. We are working with partners such as the Sun Movement here, such as FAO, WHO, UNICEF, IFAD, and other partners to really support the CAADP framework on the ground. Next slide. And this activity that I just mentioned is also focusing on resource mobilization. For example, we're developing resource mobilization strategies where we formulate business plans with the partners and the governments and doing partner mapping to really understand which areas needs to be covered and where's the gap that the government can actually emphasize in terms of mobilizing resources. We're also engaging with several ministries, especially the Ministry of Finance, because we are really advocating for domestic financing that governments should actually invest on agriculture and nutrition and food systems going forward. Strengthening self-to-self cooperation is one of our key activities that we carry through as we implement this new agenda going forward. And looking into business roundtables with different partners that we work with, and also developing position papers to support fundraising and resource mobilization. We have already started engaging with different partners that are really have shown interest excuse me, in terms of implementing the CAADP framework on the ground and pushing investments on nutrition to ensure that everybody has access to a healthy meal at the end of the day. Next slide, please. Now, from our side as AU, we also have been promoting private sector engagement, and we have developed a guideline through the support of FAO in terms of engaging the private sector to invest on nutrition activities. For example, school feeding program is one of the game changers that we actually use as an example of mobilizing private sector. We have had some meetings with some member states, such as Zambia, where we look into innovating financing for investing in school feeding program. And we were able to gather some private sector in Zambia, for example, to really advocate the importance of investing on school feeding and providing healthy meals for our children. We have the similar workshop in Nigeria, working with the partners as well, and mobilizing some of the stakeholders, philanthropists in Nigeria to invest on the school feeding program and ensuring that there is sustainable support in terms of the school feeding program in Africa. And touching also into the smallholder farmers. As you know, 70% of the food that we eat or we consume in Africa from the smallholder farmers. So we do work with the smallholder farmers and informal sector to support some of these key programs and promote investments from these sectors. Next slide, please. Just to show you the guideline that I just alluded to, and we're trying to create a win-win solution for nutrition investment in Africa by working with the private sector. We are currently piloting this guideline to really mobilize resources for nutrition investment and also leveraging on the existing frameworks. For example, the FAO private sector strategy. We're working very closely with the FAO. We're working also with the Sun Business Network, Sun Movement as well, and ensuring that we build the Africa that we want. And we want to ensure that the next 10 years, for example, Africa can feed itself and Africa can domesticate financing and allocate budget for nutrition at a national level. I know, for example, Zambia, South Africa, Botswana, they're also putting some funding towards nutrition within the national budget allocation. Next slide, please. And I think that's it for me. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup.
So thank you very much, Gefilwe, for setting the scene, so ably setting the scene for your intervention, highlighting CADUP framework and innovative financing with respect to nutrition. I now invite Juan Carlos from IFAD to share with us how investments can be designed to reach vulnerable rural populations, particularly smallholder farmers, women and youth, who are the key food producers and disproportionately affected by nutrition. You have the floor, Juan Carlos.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. If we could go to the first slide, please. And I want to talk to you about how we see in IFAD the issue of nutrition. As you may know, nutrition has always been an integral part of what IFAD does. It's actually in the Articles of Agreement that created the institution. But at the same time, our typical counterpart in governments are ministers of agriculture, who obviously tend to be, because of the nature of the work, focused on food security. So we need to talk not only about that, but also make the case many times for the value of nutrition. I won't discuss too much the big figures on the left of this slide. I think all of us know the importance that addressing nutrition has in the world. But what we always make the case, or we always need to make the case, both also, I should say, with ministers of finance, is the ultimately the economic cost of inaction when it comes to nutrition. For example, we know that children who are poorly nourished in the first 1,000 years of life has a series of problems from the point of view of productivity in the labor place many decades later. Same thing with adolescents who remain stunted and lead to reduce physical labor capabilities in addition to learning issues. And the cost for mothers, the cost that it imposes in health systems, for example. And we also see how quickly malnutrition can also be reflected in obesity and other non-communicable diseases. All of this is ultimately constraining the human capital and the economic capacity of countries. Next slide, please. So how do we approach this in IFAD in the context of agriculture projects? We use increasingly a food system approach. You probably know what the 4As are about. Availability in many of the areas where we work, when we talk about nutrition, food is, it could be, for example, bringing back certain staples that had falling out of favor, making sure that that the population understand and revalue the value that those staples have when it comes to nutrition. That's awareness, and of course that they can have access to it and that it's affordable. Next slide, and this is maybe just the key point that I'll make is the importance of multi-sector and multi-stakeholder approach, and I think Ms. Can will talk about this. I'm sure because this is why platforms such as SON are so critical, because in government, even in donor institutions, nutrition cuts across many ministries, many divisions, and this is why bringing everybody together is the real challenge. Next slide. Let me start by making the point that with this example from the Kenya Cereal Enhancement Program, this is I will just highlight the key points of this. As a rural development institution, many of us thought that if we increase the incomes of local rural populations, that automatically leads to better nutrition outcomes. And over time, all of us, we had found maybe the hard way that that's not necessarily true. And that's what we need, more integrated approaches. This is a context of a program of the Kenyan government to increase not only production, but also consumption. And this is very important. Ministries of Agriculture generally tend to be more focused on the first one, the production, but maybe not as much on the consumption of diversified vegetables, fruits, and livestock. So what we did is we combined activities to increase income generation activities. Many times they are directly related to the primary production of these diversified sets of vegetables, fruits, and livestock, but it could be other source of income at the rural level. And at the same time, we do two things to increase availability and awareness, which is we accompany this by home gardens or kitchen gardens. So we understand that families may be on the one hand doing production to increase income, but at the same time they need to have a kitchen garden which is much more diverse to accompany nutrition, and at the same time we come with training, capacity building on, and as simple as recipes of how to combine these products in a more nutritious and active manner. And of course, a key point, and I think this is reflected in the type of indicator that we use, such as the MDDW, is the involvement of women in this process. And what we could see in projects like this is we do see, yes, the increase in income, but at the same time, an important increase on the minimum dietary diversity indicator, where we see if the women in the household are reporting a more diverse consumption of foods, then we assume that the entire household nutrition has improved. Again, we need to incorporate this with a lot of activities that are also centered on women and youth and other more vulnerable populations. So this is the point where a cross-cutting approach is so critical to be successful. And then maybe next slide, just to emphasize the issue of the loop that exists between poverty and malnutrition, but also to understand the nuance that increasing incomes is necessary but not sufficient to address issues of malnutrition, particularly in the smallholder farmers we generally work with. And I think the last point, maybe in the last bullet, is the importance of ensuring that these are community-driven approaches, that the community by itself understands and values issues such as a much more diverse consumption basket is critical for long-term success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juan Carlos, for sharing IFAD and government's experience from the ground and highlighting the economic cost of inaction, as well as the multi-sectoral approaches and cross-sectoral interventions in agriculture, nutrition, and health. Thank you very much. So we now move on to our third panelist, Lawrence Haddad from GAIN, who will talk about public-private dialogue on mainstreaming nutrition in agriculture, food systems, and rural development investments. Lawrence, you have the floor.
Thank you, Excellencies, and thank you, IFAD and IFC, for inviting me to be on this panel. I only wish I could be there in person. Hopefully my slides will come up shortly. Great. So I want to talk to you today about actual things that GAIN and our partners are doing in the public-private space that are working through food systems to improve nutrition outcomes. Next, please. I just wanted to quickly situate GAIN for those of you who don't know us very well. We're an international NGO. 3/4 of our staff are based in Africa and Asia. We have 8 offices in Africa and 4 in Asia. And we are positioned at the crossroads of these two axes. We explicitly link food systems to nutrition outcomes. There's lots of ways of improving nutrition outcomes. Food systems is only one of those, but that's the focus that we have. And there are lots of people who think about food systems who don't think about nutrition. And surprisingly, lots of people who think about nutrition who don't think about food systems. And so we try to connect those. And we also try to connect the public sector with the private sector. Why the private sector? Well, if you're working in the food system space, think about it. The food system is basically the private sector. It's the guardrails are provided by the public sector, by the government and others. But essentially you have farmers, millers, processors, transport, storage, retail, marketing, banks. These are all businesses. And if you want to transform food systems for better nutrition, you have to work with them. Next, please. I wanted to give you 4 examples of how GAIN is working with the private sector and the public sector to improve nutrition outcomes through food system. So first way is to supply more nutritious foods to the marketplace. Juan Carlos was telling us about how agriculture's job is to produce and pay more attention to consumption. But the incentives are kind of stacked against agriculture because most of the incentives are towards cereals and staples and away from vegetables, fruits, pulses, eggs, dairy, fish, these kinds of foods that are high in things that are good for your health. And so we have tried to set up a blended finance facility called the Nutritious Food Finance Facility that provides finance to small and medium enterprises that are supplying nutritious foods to the market. Now, these SMEs are not doing it because they want to be good nutrition players. They're doing it because it's a good business for them. And that's what we want. We want businesses we don't want businesses to do us a favor and focus on nutrition. We want to make nutrition an essential part of their business model. And we want to support them to grow and thrive. And that's what we're doing with these SMEs. We also co-convene the Sun Business Network with the World Food Programme, and we have a Food Culture Alliance, which helps build the demand for nutritious food. So in the marketplace, we need companies and SMEs that are supplying foods, healthy foods, nutritious foods, whole foods to the marketplace for domestic consumption. And we need to build the demand for those nutritious foods in the marketplace. Now, the marketplace is the first location, the first opportunity. Another opportunity is the workforce. We work with companies and businesses and farmers from all the way from agriculture through to factories to champion investing in healthier diets for their workforces. And I'm really pleased to see IFC getting more and more active and playing a really good leadership role in this space. Why is this good for companies and why is it good for nutrition? Most workers in whether it's in agriculture or in factories tend to be women. They tend to be younger women. Obviously, their nutrition is intrinsically very important, and it's also very important for the nutrition of their newborns. So we work with companies to provide better meals, better nutrition education, breastfeeding facilities, better sanitary facilities on site in the workforce and in the workplace. Why is that good for businesses? It's good for businesses because doing this means higher productivity, less accidents, less turnover, and greater loyalty. And the Workforce Nutrition Alliance with the Consumer Goods Forum and ILO increasingly becoming interested in this is a really good example of that. The third thing we do is to try and supply more nutritious foods via public sector programs. So governments are massive procurers of food for their schools, for their clinics, for their social protection programs. And you can see this now in the School Meals Coalition, how that's really taking off. And you can see it in social protection programs where there's behavior change components to social protection programs. However, school meals and social protection programs are also incredible opportunities for governments to signal to the private sector that we think healthy and nutritious foods are important. So not only are they buying foods, these nutritious foods, they're trying to buy nutritious foods from local suppliers and local producers. This is very, very important. We have a number of social protection programs that we are working on in Africa and Asia under a program we have called Nourishing Food Pathways. And the last one is very important. We talk a lot about making nutritious and healthier foods more affordable, available, accessible, and desirable. But we're up against it when it comes to unhealthy foods. You go outside any school in Indonesia or Bangladesh or Nigeria, and you'll see local vendors who are, developing their livelihoods, but they're selling essentially junk food. And the junk food is attractive, it's tasty, it's in nice wrappers, it's cheap, kids love it. Parents feel like they have to buy it for their kids to show their love and affection for their kids. But it's very unhealthy. It's high in sugar, high in salt, high in trans fats and other kinds of unhealthy fats. So it's really important to work with youth campaigns to help them get active in championing against these kinds of foods, to create campaigns for eating healthy food that can compete with the campaigns from the private sector to eat unhealthy food. So most healthy food campaigns are very left brain. They're very science-based, they're very objective, very logical, but we need to also inject a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of aspiration, a little bit of emotion from the right brain to create really compelling, memorable campaigns for eating healthy foods. And we're also developing science-based metrics with partners that incorporate healthy and unhealthy food components. So you can see Food X is an NCD protector, protecting you against chronic disease, but it can also at the same time be a promoter. So we're trying to figure out what happens when income goes up. And as Juan Carlos and others said, income going up is a bit of a double-edged sword for nutrition, actually, because it means you can afford healthier foods, but you're also more likely to buy unhealthy foods. Next, please. So, a lot of people in the nutrition community think these two circles cannot be overlapping. If they really believe that, and if they really feel that they want to spurn the private sector, I think that's a tragedy, and I think it's irresponsible. The private sector is not just big multinational companies producing breast milk substitutes. It is small, medium, large, multinational. It is food companies and non-food companies, and we have to engage to understand the opportunities and also to understand the risks to get to this space. I think this space is waiting to be populated with investments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lawrence, for your valuable and interesting insights in some of those nutrition programs. Now I'm pleased to invite Joel, who will share with us Wellspring Development's work on potential mechanisms for screening lending and financing instruments to assess sustainability and impact. Joel, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Hope you can hear me now. Sorry, it was just muted. So this presentation, I'd like to kind of talk through builds very nicely on what Lawrence was talking about. He kind of articulated the case for why we need the role of the private sector and private sector investment into nutrition. And what I want to kind of talk through here is some work we've been doing to help investors, DFIs, and impact funds, etc., identify and screen for investments which can achieve positive nutrition outcomes. Next slide, please. So, I mean, first of all, why develop a nutrition lens investing framework or tool in the first place? So I think ultimately it's to help drive an increased volume of financing into companies, producers, processors, but also all of the companies that provide the enabling infrastructure for nutritious foods, and to give DFIs, funds, and donors a common understanding of what constitutes a nutrition investment, much like the 2X challenge has done for gender lens investing over the previous years, and we've seen a real surge in investment in that area recently. This tool is suitable for kind of funds with different levels of ambition and focus on nutrition lens investing. So, generalist funds or broader agricultural funds with multiple impact goals, but who are also interested in nutrition, can integrate this into their investment processes to be able to kind of incrementally improve their focus on nutrition over time. And just to mention, you know, this work was initially commissioned by USAID and USDFC. The USDFC have actually used it to kind of make and screen for multiple investments, and it has been adopted by several other funds as well. But going forward, we're working together with GAIN to then turn this into an online platform tool that can be available for investors to use and to kind of drive uptake among the DFI investment community as well. Great. So at a high level, this nutrition lens investing framework is built around a theory of change, which, you know, ultimately aims at all the things we've been talking about previously. So improve nutrition for all through increased affordability and availability of nutritious foods. And so it has three main pathways: a production pathway, which looks at you know, increased production capacity, so producers, farmers, etc., being able to increase volumes of nutritious foods that are produced. A processing and packaging pathway, which has sort of three criteria which sit underneath that. One around increased processing capacity, so, you know, investments that allow processors to scale up their production of nutritious processed foods, including fortified flours, but also, you know, fruit, vegetable, animal source protein, etc. Helping to improve investments that improve product composition of existing foods, so, you know, maybe reducing trans fat, sugar, salt content, and then also improving packaging and labeling to you know, make foods more attractive, affordable, or accessible to low-income communities. And then finally, a component which is often, sorry, can we just go back to the previous slide? Yeah, finally, a component which is often forgotten about a little bit when talking about you know, nutrition investing is this component around storage, distribution, and marketing. So it's not just increasing volumes, but also how is food stored, distributed, or made accessible to customers in a more effective way, which reduces food loss along the supply chains, you know, and improves the food quality as well, you know, thinking about cold chain, etc. Yeah, next slide, please. So the tool that we've developed, which currently is an Excel tool which investors can use, but is, as I say, is going to be turned into an online tool in the near future. It has two stages. So the first stage is a food product screening, where you know, the investment is screened according to the food product or products that the company or project falls into. And then secondly, you know, if it passes this stage, then alignment with one of those 7 criteria that you saw on the previous slide in the theory of change. Next slide, please. So, I mean, I won't go into this in any detail, but we've built on the great work that GAIN and others have done already. So this GAIN in the nutrition food financing facility, especially to kind of categorize foods according to red, amber, green. And really we're focused here on the green component. So what we've classified as nutritious foods, so fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts and seeds, animal source protein, fortified flours, biofortified crops, etc. The reason we have this amber and red component is really more for investors who are also looking at taking more of a do no harm approach. Maybe they want to say, okay, we're investing in a portfolio of different types of food, not all nutritious, but we will make sure that we exclude X or Y. So this helps with that categorization. Once an investment qualifies as green, then you move on to the next stage. So next slide, please. And so for each of those pathways, we have a set of metrics that investors can then use to say, okay, so for example, here on the screen is the metric for increased production. Here we're looking at investment or company which increases volumes of food produced or reduces the price of foods produced through their production, and the food is primarily sold domestically or regionally. So say it's a tomato processor and it ticks this box, then tomato producer and it ticks this box, then your investment qualifies. Won't go into the next two slides in any detail, but helpful maybe just to flash them up. We have similar metrics here for the processing and packaging pathway, and on the next slide for storage, distribution, and marketing as well. And this is all built into the tool. Maybe I'll just finish by saying, this is just a very quick run through of a much longer set of guidance that we've developed, which includes advice for investors on, if they're doing their investment through funds, which a lot of DFIs are because of the small ticket size involved, how to think about screening at the fund level or lines of credit through banks, how to apply this in terms of different investment financial instruments, so equity, debt, project finance, etc. So yeah, happy to answer any more questions and we can share this in more detail, but just to give you a quick flavor of what the framework and the tool involves. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Joel, for sharing with us those very interesting, innovative tools. This is actually a good transition to the second segment of this event, which is largely focused on the private sector. But before we move on, I wish to open the floor for questions and answers from participants here in the room and online. In asking your questions, please specify to which panelist you are addressing the question to. Ilaria from IFAD, who is in the room, will help with questions from online participants. So anybody ready to go with the questions on the floor?
Maybe I'll, this is Antonella Cordoni. I'm the Senior Technical Specialist for Nutrition and Social Inclusion at IFAD. Thank you very much for great moderation, and thank you very much to all the panelists. I don't know if we can see all the panelists online. Maybe put your cameras on. Maybe one question for Lawrence. Lawrence, at IFAD, beyond all our theory of changes and action plans, actually IFAD will update its action plan this year. At the end of the day, we really are hungry of understanding really the good practices. And having experience from your end on the private sector, and which are really the tools, which are the incentives for an organization like IFAD to attract the private sector. And my second question goes to Joel. Joel, from your perspective, how can donors, and we have some of them in our room today, and financial, how can they balance financial returns with long-term social impacts in nutrition-sensitive projects? Thank you.
Anybody else? Another question? I think we have a question there.
Thank you very much. I'm Katrin Engelhardt from WHO Geneva, Department of Nutrition and Food Safety. Thank you very much for those great presentations. I do have a plea, actually, because we've been talking about private sector, and as we've heard, there are many different private sector entities. And I think it's really important we start having a bit of a nuance, what we mean with private sector, and which ones to work with and which ones maybe not to work with in detail. We had the session before lunch, which was summarizing a project where we support countries in implementing front of pack labeling, marketing restrictions, taxation of unhealthy foods and sugar sweetened beverages. And there, one of my colleagues, Ms. Kate Robertson, did say that for some of the policy interventions, it's really difficult to actually work with private sector because we're trying to regulate the sales of foods, in particular those that are high in salt, sugar, and fat. And when I looked at the slide that I think Joel pulled up, looking at the red foods, one of the criteria was obviously breast milk substitutes, alcohol was listed, and then sugary beverages were listed with no nutritional value. But even a chocolate milk with high sugar content, the sugar has a negative impact on health, can have a negative impact on health, and can also kind of influence the development of dietary preferences. So I think on the one hand side, we do need to start distinguishing between the different private sectors that we work with. There are very many that we have to work with in order to combine the nutrition and commercial goals that Lawrence put up. It's important to combine the nutrition and commercial goals. And I also believe we can, definitely. But I think it's really important also to really realize the commercial determinants of health that are also driving poverty, hunger, and malnutrition as well. So just more of a plea, maybe. Thank you.
Thank you. So do we have another question while we turn it back to the panelists?
Thank you very much. This is a question for Lawrence Haddad again from Sandy Thomas, Global Panel. Lawrence, you made the important point that we need to build demand for healthy diets, healthy foods rather. And you made the point also that most healthy food campaigns are science-based, which I think the point you're making there is that that's a bit of a turn-off for many consumers. So what is your vision, just briefly, for what a successful healthy food campaign would look like? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for those questions. I think we'll now turn over to the panelists to respond to those questions. I think there was a question for Lawrence, Joel, and Lawrence again, and a plea from WHO. So please proceed to respond to those questions. Thank you.
Shall I go first? Joel, is that okay? Okay. So thank you for the questions. First, I just want to recognize and applaud the call for nuance. I think it's long overdue. So thank you, WHO colleague. I didn't quite catch your name, but thank you for raising that point. And coming from WHO, it's especially powerful. On Sandy's question, I got two very quick examples for you. And of course, I didn't mean forget about the science. I mean, keep the science, but add the other stuff in. So in Kenya, we developed a program for healthy eating with Kenyan scientists, the Kenyan government, and importantly, Kenyan marketers. And the marketing that we came up with for healthy foods in general was a strapline, "These foods made me." And it was a picture of famous sports people, famous artists, musicians, people who are aspirational people within the Kenyan culture. And we had a list of their pictures of the foods that they ate when they were kids, that were healthy foods, and a picture of themselves. The word nutrition is not mentioned anywhere. The word healthy is not mentioned anywhere, but it's "these foods made me." And the idea is that eating these foods will help you to not only survive, but thrive and achieve your ambitions. And that was, that work, there was a lot of market research that went into that design. There's a negative version of that, which is something we run in Indonesia and Mozambique called Demos, emotional demonstrations, which is where we get unhealthy foods and we work with a group of mothers. So this is less mass media and more community-based. Work with a group of mothers, dissolve a cheese puff, one of these really scary looking cheese puffs in a cup of water, and pass that around, and you can see the smoke coming off of it. You can see the big oil slick forming on the top of the water, and that generates an emotional response, which is usually revulsion. I can't believe I'm giving this to my kid. So that's less science-based, but well, it is science-based because those foods are not good for you. But it's trying to strike an emotional response that people can remember. So those are two examples. Onto Antonella's question. I think, I joined GAIN 9 years ago, and I'd never worked. Quite a few people were skeptical within GAIN, maybe they still are, of me joining GAIN because they said, "Oh, this guy doesn't know anything about private sector. He's never worked in the private sector. He's never really worked with the private sector." And, they were right to be skeptical. But I've learned so much that is horrifying, as well as so much that is inspiring from talking to companies, big, small, large, food, non-food. And I think that's my answer to you is you have to engage. We always tell all our staff at GAIN, you have to engage with the private sector. That doesn't mean you have to work with them, and it doesn't mean you have to endorse them, but you have to engage to figure out who are the scoundrels, who's doing the bad stuff really behind the panels where they say everything's wonderful. To get behind the panels, you have to talk to them, and you have to understand what their motivations are, what their constraints are, and then you begin to see the opportunities. But I think the biggest mistake most people make is, as I said, trying to drag the private sector into the nutrition space. You can't do that. You have to drag nutrition into their world, because they will say, well, as long as we're not breaking any laws, leave us alone. We're just providing what the consumer wants. That's disingenuous because they influence what the consumer wants as well. But nevertheless, just as when we're trying to convince consumers to consume healthy foods, we have to bring healthy foods to the things the consumers care about. We can't bring consumers to healthy foods. We have to do it the other way around. Similarly, we have to bring businesses, we have to bring nutrition to the businesses. So anything that improves their bottom line, that minimizes waste and maximizes sales, they're up for it. We just have to talk to them to figure out how to do that.
Thank you. I think there was a question for Joel.
Great. Yeah, thanks very much. So, I mean, if I understand correctly, the questions around, how DFIs, development partners, etc., should think about sort of this trade-off and balance between financial returns and social impact when investing in nutrition. So, I mean, we've worked with a lot of the DFIs and IFIs and impact funds over the last 10 to 15 years, particularly those investing in agriculture. And what you'll see is that the majority of investments has been focused on high-value export crops, right? But not nutritious foods necessarily, or not nutritious foods into kind of local and regional markets, because they're less risky, there's higher margins, there's more formalized supply chains. So I think the first thing to say is that it is more difficult to invest in nutritious food value chains, or at least DFIs and impact investors have tended to stay away from it in the past because of the risks involved. But of course, this is what we want more of, right? And so I think really there needs to be a kind of more risk tolerant, patient capital approach taken to investing in nutrition. What that means in practice, it can be a number of different things. I mean, if I look at what's happening in the climate space at the moment, over the last few years, DFIs are really starting to innovate in terms of instruments, right? You look at, for example, BII with their climate innovation facility, where they're trying to make very difficult investments into, say, climate adaptation using a whole range of new tools like, flexible debt, credit enhancement, different types of guarantees, project development loans, etc. I think this is the kind of innovation and focus we need in the nutrition space as well, to try and take a long-term view for investing in nutritious food value chains in Africa and Asia, Latin America in particular. And it really requires kind of the shareholders of these DFIs and IFIs to take nutrition seriously and to put it high on the agenda, so that there's kind of similar initiatives, platforms, facilities at the same scale and level of innovation. It's not to say it can't be done. I mean, if you look at aquaculture in East Africa, for example, 10 years ago, there was not much going on at a commercial scale. A few different actors, together with government, made a range of seed investments in, around Lake Victoria, Kenya, Uganda. And now we've got a huge ecosystem of and lots of tilapia production. So, I mean, it definitely takes a long time horizon, and it takes, some risk tolerant capital, but I think that's essentially the approach that's required.
Can I come in quickly on that, Excellency? Just to add to, I agree with Joel, what Joel said, but I think a big gap is aggregation. A lot of the DFIs and investors think it's just too difficult. Transaction costs are too high of trying to track down these small, medium, even the large national companies. So you need aggregation mechanisms. GAFSP is an aggregation mechanism, N3F as an aggregation mechanism, and maybe public development banks could also be an aggregation mechanism for the DFIs. Back to you.
So thank you very much, panelists, for responding to those questions. Perhaps I can call on Kefilwe to make some concluding remarks.
Listen. Thank you so much, Honorable Moderator. Thank you so much for that. And thanks to my panelists, Lawrence and Joel. From me or from the African Union Development Agency, I think like many have said, we welcome new partnership. As you know, we have this new strategy starting from 2026 to 2035. We have already started to engage with, for example, GAIN and other partners, such as the Sun Movement as well. And we are trying to also ensure that the guidelines for engaging private sector in Africa will be launched this year, end of October in Mauritius, during the CADAP Partnership Platform meeting. So we'll continue to advocate for nutrition investments across board, and of course, engaging with the key relevant ministries to, for domestic financing for nutrition, and ensuring that our governments are really allocating budgets towards nutrition and food systems. And I think one example that I can mention is that in the Africa Food Systems pre-summit, a lot of conventions on the food systems conveners and the CADAP were speaking one language in terms of promoting investment for food systems and nutrition in the continent. So we'll strongly advocate for nutrition investments using the African Union platform, such as the AU summits, and really convincing our leaders to put commitments towards nutrition investments in the continent. We do also have national agriculture investment plans. That is also going to be one of our important tools to really push for investments in nutrition and food systems in Africa. Our new chapter, which is from next year, is to ensure that we have one comprehensive and multi-sectoral investment plan to promote agriculture, food systems, and nutrition in the continent. I think that will be a wrap from me, and thanks for the opportunity again, and thanks to IFAD, AFC, and the World Bank for the great conversation. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you very much. At this stage, I'd just like to thank the panelists for your inspiring interventions and responses to the questions that were raised. I think, thank you.
Thank you so much.
So I think we move on to the next panel. And are we all ready? Okay. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, discussions around nutrition are often dominated by public sector voices, and for a good reason. After all, it's public health issues. However, nutrition is also a business risk, and companies in low and middle income countries face significant challenges due to malnutrition-related productivity losses. We are here to appreciate the role of the private sector investment in nutrition and look at opportunities in that space, specifically through agribusiness lenses. Therefore, naturally, the second panel topic is nutrition-sensitive impact financing in the private sector. So a quick reminder, to our virtual participants who have joined. The mics are muted, and questions submitted in the chat will be reviewed, grouped, and announced by online moderators. Allow me to introduce the second group of panelists, all joining virtually today. So we have Gert van Huizenveld, Sustainability Manager, Volkov Chagalani Coffee Limited. Adam Struve, Global Sector Lead for Crop Inputs and Agri-Commodity Trade at IFC. Niraj Shah, Head of Global Agriculture and Food Security Program, Private Sector Window. So although I'm not seeing anybody on my screen, but let's proceed. So we'll start with a representative from the private sector, Volkov and its branch in Uganda. Chagalani Coffee Limited are considering introducing nutrition into extensive farmer outreach program that the company has in Uganda. So the question here is, what motivated you to consider nutrition as an important intervention in your supply chain, and how do you plan to do it? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador, for introducing me, and thanks IFC and IFAD for inviting me. I hope you can all hear me well. My name is Geert-Jan Huizenveld, Sustainability Manager for Chagalani Coffee. We are part of Volcafe, which is a Swiss-based coffee trader. I want to share something about what we do with coffee smallholder farmers in Uganda, and how nutrition and support and training on nutrition for smallholder farmers can contribute to what we do with our smallholder farmers. First, a bit about Chagalani Coffee. We are one of the main buyers and exporters of coffee in Uganda. We buy and export Arabica coffee, Robusta coffee, and a little bit of Liberica Excelsa coffee. We buy from farmers, from middlemen, from farmer groups, process and export it to all parts of the world, EU, United States, Far East, Australia. That is our core business. What we also do, and that's what I want you to, I like to share something about, is we have set up over the years for I think we go back 10 to 15 years, sustainable supply chains where we work with smallholder farmers. We have 5 certified value chains in 5 different regions, with roughly 35,000 farmers, Arabica farmers as well as Robusta farmers. And we talk about smallholder farmers. Our average Arabica farmer has an acre, less than an acre of coffee. Robusta farmers is slightly more, but the average again is about 2.5 acres per coffee farmer. And it is obviously for farmers a cash crop where they generate income and run their farm and run their household. The focus from the beginning, when we started our certified value chains, our sustainable value chains, was very much on supporting training farmers on good economical practices with the aim of increasing productivity, production, and quality of coffee so that the farmers can sell better and more coffee to us, because that is still our core business. And with that, generate a better living income. And the trainings and the support that we've been given to farmers was very much focusing on, again, good economical practices. So trainings on rejuvenation, trainings on integrated soil fertility management, trainings on quality post-harvest handling, training on farming as a business, training on farming, training on financial literacy. Again, with the aim to increase production, productivity, and quality of the coffee that is available. We also supported with, for instance, setting up model farms, demo plots, where we show farmers how, in our view, coffee should be grown, again, with the aim of improving production, productivity, quality. Over the years, we added the number of topics, so to say, that we supported farmers with. So the focus is still very much on good economical practices, regenerative practices, but there's also a number of other topics that we've added over the years, social topics, the topic of child protection, child labor, for instance, but also conservation, climate change. And a very important part is our gender program, and I think that is where the link with nutrition and our collaboration with IFC comes in. Is we call it the gender program internally. So in our value chains, in 4 out of the 5 value chains, we run a gender program focusing on supporting households, coffee households, on joint decision making. Our philosophy, our approach is that if the household, the family, the couple that runs the household have a sort of joint approach on how they think that the farm and the household should be run, that decisions are jointly made on what's being invested in the farm, where the money that's being generated, where it's going. If that is strengthened, supported, trying to take away challenges, then that can contribute to better farming, better running of the household, and also to better coffee farming. So that's what we've been implementing since 2014, 2015, so for more than 10 years. And part of that gender program is also to support families in access to finance. So we set up village saving and loan associations where 20 to 25 households out of a community set up the VSLA, the Village and Saving and Loan Associations, and they can save money, or they do save money on a weekly basis that can be used for investments in the farm, but also for social topics, for school fees, for instance, for medical bills. And the VSLAs are also more and more used. In the beginning, it was very much focused again on the gender program, but we used the VSLAs and the gender groups also as a starting point for trainings, as a starting point for coffee buying, as a starting point for trainings on non-economical topics, but also as a coffee buying, also for instance, model farms. Everything that we do with these households is, again, support them in improving their well-being and improving their living income. And I think that is where nutrition comes in. I think with our collaboration with IFC, we hope to very much train our own staff and create knowledge on that topic, but also train farmers on nutrition. And by doing that, we hope that their overall well-being improves, contribute, and adding to what we already do with the VSLAs, the gender groups, and that, in our view, can contribute to again, well-being, a living income, and a better overall farm management. So I think we hope very much to learn from this as well as a company, because it's the first time that we are focusing on this topic. So we can learn internally, we can hopefully roll it out in one of the 5 areas that we work, and then hopefully scale up in the years to come to the other 4 areas, so that it contributes to the staff, the knowledge of staff, knowledge and skills of our staff, but most importantly to the smallholder farmers that we work with. Thank you very much.
So VLCAP's programs and upcoming programs are good examples of how a private sector company can contribute to fighting malnutrition, especially among smallholder farmers and their families. It would be great to have a higher level view on the potential for private agribusiness investments to address nutrition challenges. So thank you, Gert. So I'm now happy to pass on the floor to Adam for your interventions. Adam, you have the floor.
Yes, hi, thank you. And I'm going to try and share some slides today. And let me first start off. So you heard a little bit about a specific loan operation we have with Volcafe. And I can take a step back. And for those of you who don't know IFC so well, if we go to the next page, I can explain a little bit how we approach the agri-business and forestry space, right? So what we do in the space needs to, we've got 3 strategic pillars, and it needs to align with at least one of these strategic pillars. And it's recognizing that agribusiness takes place in a very complex ecosystem where climate is relevant, where also then social issues and also the issues around social development are very important. And of course, agriculture is typically in rural areas, and rural areas have their own challenges. But perhaps the most intrinsic of these priorities around the agribusiness space is enhancing food nutrition and security. So this is the pillar of our 3 pillars that I'll focus on a little bit more today. And if we go to the next slide, understanding a little bit what IFC does. So we've got, in broad terms, 2 categories on the left and on the right of activities. One are financial products. So for example, loans, equity. But there's also, because we know we can't address all of the world's problems with our own resources, there's also a number of ways where we bring other resources, financial resources, into our projects. And sometimes that's crowding in private sector where that's possible. So in other words, private sector banks. Other times it may not be in very difficult markets. Sometimes we need to help de-risk our own projects, and that's where blended finance comes in. You can see that on the left side. And we'll also have a little bit more of a deeper dive into blended finance after I speak to you here. So I'm going to park that largely for the next segment. But then on the right side, you get an overview of some of the services we have in addition to the financial products that I mentioned, such as loan and equity. And recognizing that a lot of what we have to challenge, or the challenges that our clients are facing in the ecosystems that they're working in, have to do with fragmented value chains, have to deal with inefficient suppliers, or suppliers who are operating sort of at the margins in terms of their own profitability and income. And so there's a number of advisory tools that we've got and we've developed over the years where we can help de-risk the project, not only for the benefit of our own investment, which makes us financially more sustainable, but also typically is having a positive impact on the communities around the company we're investing with. Perhaps it's upstream or downstream from the type of operation that we're supporting. But it's a very complex ecosystem, and we have various advisory tools to address the challenges depending upon whether they're on the, let's say, supply side and working directly with the farmers, or whether it might be, for example, in milling operations. Sometimes we've worked downstream with the small bakeries that are buying from the milling operation. And we'll go to the next slide. So this is just to give an overview of what it is we're doing across the agri-food and forest product space. If you look on the right side there, it shows you that we've got 4 big buckets in which we categorize what we're doing across this agri-food and forestry space. And I'm going to talk about a couple of projects in a couple of these buckets here. So I'll be focusing on an example from primary production and processing. In this case, it's flour milling. And then we've got a bucket of projects around protein. So whether it's aquaculture or dairy or meats, and that's then another 2 projects I'm going to use as a case study. And so if we go to the next slide. So here I just wanted to take a little bit of a deeper dive into what we saw sectorally on the last slide. In other words, here we're talking about investments we have specifically around milling. And you can see that it's about $55 million for own $55 million of investment that IFC makes on average per year in milling operations, companies in and around the milling space. And if you look over on the right side, over half of those investments have been made in operations where an IFC project has helped transition into fortified flour. And so we're doing quite a bit. We're doing quite a bit in the fortified flour space, and where we're trying to grow is also on the edible oil side. We're starting to work more and more with companies that are enhancing the nutrition profile of edible oils. And if we go to the next slide. And so this is the first case study, and just to sort of make this all a little bit concrete, if the last couple of slides were a bit abstract. So in this particular case, it's a question of trying to introduce affordable and safe protein in Zambia and Botswana was a case here for a regional player. And with this regional player, they were essentially needing to build out the entire supply chain for chicken production. So this means in order to get to the price point that was relevant in the population, you need scale. However, scale is not directly in the client that we face, but they needed to develop also and enhance their own capacity with outgrower farmers. So there was an enormous effort needed around expanding or building first a outgrower network, and then ultimately making sure that the installations were operating, of course, to modern food safety standards. And so there's a lot that went into setting up a supply chain for affordable protein. And we're able, in this case, not just simply to lend into the transaction, but we're also a partner in the business. And we were also involved in several initiatives to increase the resource efficiency. So just simply thinking a little bit about how to achieve the right price point meant ultimately making sure that these outgrowers were as efficient as possible in terms of their own resource utilization, which of course has a green aspect to it as well. And what I'll do is, maybe I know there's very limited time, so I'm just going to give a very high level overview of these examples and go to the next slide. And here, this is a flour milling operation in a country that did not have fortification mandates. And so we're talking about Sierra Leone. And here it was a mill that had been, a mill that was established since the 1960s. Turbulent times in the country, it was out of operation for some years during the war. But ultimately, a local entrepreneur had the vision to bring back flour production in the country. And so fortification, when one considers the incidence of malnourishment in Liberia, this was then a case, I'm sorry, this is Sierra Leone, apologies. When one considers the situation in the country where this mill would have the potential to supply about half of the population's flour needs, the impact of fortification becomes very, very obvious. This is another example where we also used blended finance. And I'll go to the next example. And here, this is a dairy operation in Eastern Africa, a regional player. And in this particular case, we have a challenge of trying to provide then not just affordable, but safe milk at scale. And we had several projects with this company, Pearl Dairy, over the years. And along those years and the two engagements, the company was able to double its milk production. And once again, here it relied a lot on smaller farmers, many of whom were very, very informal in the operation that they had. So in other words, a lot of food safety concerns, but also simply being able to produce reliably and efficiently. And so this was the challenge for Pearl Dairy as it was trying to scale up the volume of milk that it could offer into the market. And so here, again, there was a series of initiatives that were necessary over the course of about 3 or 4 years. In fact, longer if you take the two engagements we had, in order to help develop that network of outgrower farmers, make sure that they were developing the volumes that could make the overall operation successful, and being able to do that with food safety standards that were very important in an operation like this. And so I know we've got very limited time today, so I'm going to leave the examples there, and you'll have a chance to see also one more project, or I should say on the blended finance side, a colleague's going to talk a little bit about the overall approach. And I hope that these examples gave you some illustrations for how this plays out then on the ground in a specific IFC operation. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam, for your elaborate presentation and you mentioned blended financing as an investment tool that encourages private sector to become a part of the solution to malnutrition in emerging markets, as well as highlighting IFC products and services and financing investment in supply chain for affordable protein. So thank you for that. So I'll move on to Niraj, who can please walk us through what blended finance is and how it works and links to private sector and nutrition.
Thank you. Just want to check if you can hear me, because I'm doing a video on one device and audio on another. So thank you. Thanks. I think it's great that you heard from Adam, because it's a good segue. And we'll be using a couple of those examples that Adam mentioned to explain what blended finance is. So I'll try to be a little more technical, so what exactly do we mean when we say blended finance? And if you Google blended finance, you'll come across a variety of definitions. So I think from our perspective at IFC, it's important to explain how we look at blended finance and what it is and what it is not. So very simply, IFC has been looking at blended finance for over 20 years. Starting in the early 2000s with the money that we received from Canada for climate-related blended finance investments. But essentially what we're saying is you are trying to finance a project or an investment on purely commercial terms, but for whatever reason, and we call those participation constraints, these constraints are preventing a commercial investor from investing in that project. And so the purpose of blended finance is to bring in concessional funds or funds on concessional terms, which would blend with the commercial money that's going into that project in such a way as to make it an overall win-win-win for the donor, for the commercial investor, as well as for the client. So we, for many years now, many of the DFIs have signed up to something called the blended finance principles. There are 5 principles. The main principle is really what is the rationale for using concessional funds in this particular transaction or project. And there the economists have actually come up with 2 different types of constraints. One is the participation constraint, which is just preventing the commercial investor from going into that particular project. And there's a separate set of constraints called behavioral constraints. And I'll come to that in a minute. So just focusing on the participation constraints, these could be as simple as it's a greenfield project in a very tricky country, in a very fragile environment. The commercial investor might be willing to come in, but the price of the funding that the commercial investor is offering is way too expensive for the economics of the project to work out. And so, and if you look at the Sierra Leone example that Adam mentioned, it is an expansion, is a very risky proposition. There's not enough collateral, at least till the plant is built up. There's not enough collateral to satisfy the requirements for the commercial investor. And so blended finance comes in and splits that financing. You saw the 12 million financing that came in, 6 million came from a commercial investor, in this case IFC, and then the 6 million comes in from the IDA private sector window, which is one of the blended finance facilities that we manage. And we're coming in on a subordinated basis, which means that the first rights to the collateral, if something were to go wrong with the project, with the commercial investor, and the concessional part comes next. So in effect, we are de-risking the commercial investor to come in and participate in that project. Similarly, you could have situations where you want a guarantee. Funding is not an issue, but you're worried about not getting repaid. So you want a guarantee from a commercial investor, from a concessional provider. And you see that very often across the world, different donors They are offering guarantees for what we call first loss covers for different types of projects. You could have these blended finance structures which are either directly being offered to companies or indirectly through banks or financial institutions. So you have two routes. If you are trying to reach really small SME lending or really smallholder financing, you may not be able to do it directly with a large institution like IFC. So you then work with either a microfinance institution or a bank, which then on-lends to the smaller agri SMEs for whatever reason. And so for the purpose of this presentation, I'm not just focusing on nutrition-related investments or smallholders in general, depending on what the problem is that blended finance is trying to address. There's a third set of problems which many of you are familiar with, which is local currency, affordable local currency. It's not like the local banks can't do it. They are not able to offer it at reasonable rates or at for long enough tenors to make certain projects viable. And so you also have some facilities or some donors who are willing to take either fully or partially the cost of the foreign currency risk in a particular project. So you're trying to either buy down or subsidize the cost of the swap with a local provider, so that the end cost of the financing that goes to the client is much more affordable. And then hopefully, the expectation was that if it's a bank or a microfinance institution, then they are on lending to the smaller clients on affordable terms because of the back end support from blended finance. So this is on say the participation constraints. And so you have certain instruments, certain loans, or you can do some equity investments, which would be addressing these. There's a separate set of constraints, which we call behavioral constraints, where we are trying to change the behavior of the client in a particular direction. So if you want a client to, fortify their products, but the cost of the equipment which needs to go into the plant is pretty high, and the client is not willing to, or the economics are not making sense, then you could come up with a structure which uses some form of grant financing or some incentive linked payment, which says that, okay, if you meet so and so targets, we will either reduce the price of the financing, or we'll give you some cash as a performance-based incentive, something which drives the behavior of the client in a particular direction. That could be fortification, that could be to do more SME lending, more women-led investments, whatever is the theme that the donor has provided the money for. And I think that's an important thing. Different donors have different priorities. Priorities change, as you know. And so when we are looking at blended finance, we always have to keep two things in mind. One is, what is the purpose, or what are the eligibility criteria that have been agreed with the provider of the concessional funding, which includes a whole bunch of countries. So you'll see that certain countries, because the donors' priorities are not for those particular countries or types of countries, you won't have much access to blended finance. Certain other countries, at the like fragility, there'll be a certain set of donors who are very interested in supporting projects in those countries. So that's on the donor eligibility criteria. And then the other set of criteria which we at IFC have to follow are these blended finance principles. We have to absolutely justify the use of concessional funding in a project, because the one thing we are not supposed to do is enhance the profits of the commercial investor just because we have the commercial concessional funding available to us. So we have different ways in which you would address this. And I think the Sierra Leone project was an example where it was a highly risky project. The other one was Pearl Dairy, which was supported by GAFSP back in 2014, when they were really setting up the plant. Again, it was highly risky at that point. I'd just like to maybe end by saying that blended finance is not meant to be a permanent solution. The whole point is you are trying to get a temporary concessionality or subsidy into that to hopefully have the client on a path to commercial sustainability. So I think the expectation is that we'll come in initially, but then if you have a second round of funding, or you're bringing in some private equity or any equity investors, those will be coming in on commercial terms, because we've proved sort of the proof of concept has been established. I'll stop there. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam, for walking us through that technical expose on blended financing. I think I shall now move on to the question and answer session. And again, we'll request 2 questions from the floor. And Miller will help us collect questions virtually. Thank you very much. Any takers? Okay, there's somebody in the back there.
Yeah, Akutose with FAO. Just a bit of clarity in case the blended finance, there is an example that looked at the lower end of the value chain. It seems the examples that were shown looked at the top end of the value chain. And throughout the week and other sessions, we've heard about the risk of PDBs not being interested in risk of, let's say, lower end of the value chain in terms of agribusiness on the farm level because the risk is high. How do we de-risk and all that? So I just wanted to see if there have been any example of the blended finance trying to attempt to address some of those risks.
Thank you. Any other question before we move on to questions online? I see none. Okay, so perhaps Niraj.
Yeah, let me. It's a very good question. I mean, I think we hear this all the time, and as I mentioned, I think there are certain projects that we would be able to support directly, and you may call it the high end. But really, when it comes down to small ticket financing at the farm level or at the really MSME level, it has to be done through local banks. So there are 2 ways in which we do that. We either offering certain concessionality to banks to improve their cost of funding to the lowest, as what we call the base of the pyramid borrowers. And there it's simply a function of absorbing some of the risk of that portfolio. So we have a number of banking clients across Africa where we've seen them increase their agri portfolio lending. And then the other thing we have noticed, and we don't call it blended finance, but we have a lot of donors who offer us concessional funding for advisory services or technical assistance, as we call it, where we then do work with the banks or microfinance institutions to improve their capacity to lend to these clients. I think half of the challenge is that they don't have the expertise or they haven't got the track record, and that's where the IFC advisory teams are working with either the banks, but on the other side, you're also trying to work with at the farm level, trying to aggregate the farmers, because let's also acknowledge the fact that even from a bank's perspective, I think dealing with multiple individual borrowers is very expensive and increases the risk. So for their perspective also, they would like to see some aggregation, and they would like to see working through some form of either producer organizations or cooperatives. And I think that's where we've had a fair bit of success through on the advisory side with the Agribusiness Leadership Program, where you're trying to look at the value chain as a whole. So even if you're supporting, say, a commercial manufacturer or somebody putting up a plant, the fact that they're sourcing a lot of the raw materials, from smallholders in the value chain, you're trying to provide a solution that's addressing the risk of the actual project, and then you're also trying to de-risk the value chain by improving the professionalism of the suppliers in the chain. So I know I'm not directly answering your question, and I don't know what were the discussions in the earlier part of this program, but I think one of the challenges we realize is that working with local banks and microfinance institutions is really the key to getting the financing in at an affordable level at the bottom. And it's an ongoing discussion is what I'll say. Thanks.
Thank you, Niraj, for that. And I wish to also thank all the other panelists for their brilliant insights and a lot of food for thought. My big thanks to the audience here in the room as well as online for their active participation. Now, it is my honor to invite Afshan Khan, Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations and Coordinator for the Scaling Up Nutrition, for your concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Kondolo, and distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. I think we've really heard an important set of inspiring contributions and reflections today. And the ideas and exchanges from financing models to food systems to public-private collaboration and realities faced by rural communities and smallholder farmers. All of these are important parts of a conversation as to why investing in nutrition as an outcome is so important. My main takeaway from this discussion is really the opportunity to change how we work together across sectors, across institutions, and across financing streams to end malnutrition in all its forms. We've heard some powerful examples of how public and private sector together can drive progress, and why investing in nutrition is not just the right thing to do, it's smart economics. We heard earlier that malnutrition is not only a public health challenge, it's also a business and development imperative. The productivity losses tied to undernutrition are staggering, and as the president of IFAD put forward, the cost to the global economies is in trillions of dollars each year. And the proven investment in nutrition interventions with a $1 for each dollar invested, a $23 return on investment is nothing short of extraordinary. But we've seen as well, and many of you in the room are very cognizant of this, that despite this, nutrition financing remains insufficient and uneven. And that's whether it's investments in the agri-food sector or whether it's investments in health and the social sector. And I was really struck by listening to some of the sun countries that were presented in the discussion today, whether that was Uganda or Zambia. There is space in several to increase domestic investment. And we've heard of what the opportunities are for that investment to be leveraged into broader investments, whether it's government, whether it's the private sector, or whether it's the cross-fertilization between those in terms of some of the blended financing opportunities that were spoken about so eloquently with the presenters. But I want to flag one issue that I felt hasn't come up enough yet, and that's the fragile and conflict-affected states, where reliance on ODA is high and physical space is limited, and the gap is urgent and growing. So there's a persistent disconnect between what are some of the needs in country and the supply of concessional finance in these types of contexts. And this requires far better coordination across ministries nationally, but also a need to really have different types of instruments that can focus on fragile and conflict-affected states. And that's why I think the work that's being done with IFAD and some of the other stakeholders is so critical to move this forward, because we need opportunities to unlock new resources, and countries have opportunities to navigate different funding streams. We've heard about that, whether it's multilateral development banks, development finance institutions, climate, biodiversity mechanisms. And we know that nutrition needs to be integrated into broader financing strategies. But I also think we clearly need much more focus and investment in these fragile states to build out some of the most important opportunities to tackle malnutrition, and particularly undernutrition amongst women and children. I want to come back to also some of the points that were raised on why a differentiated context-specific approach is essential, especially as was raised in the questions for smallholder farmers, as well as those living in fragile settings. If we want policies that reflect real needs, we need to also elevate the voices of women, of youth, of civil society, and parliamentary groups and others. As the national commitment data shows, these remain the least engaged groups. They're not peripheral stakeholders. They're powerful agents of change. And I think more and more we need to create the spaces that allow for these groups to come forward, identify what their needs are, and what the potential investment opportunities are to bring together some of these proven models, innovative financing mechanisms, and promising partnerships. And this alignment between communities, government, civil society stakeholders, development finance institutions, donors, and the private sector is part of what the Sun platform offers through its networks of constituents, but also through its multiple stakeholder model. I really think there's opportunities for us to broaden engagement and to look specifically, how do we match better the needs between what is coming forward as an offer from some of the development finance partners and what are the needs of the communities we serve. And I think this bridging that's happening more and more is something we need to be able to talk about, not only at the global level in sessions like this, but really to distill it into action at the country level in a meaningful way. And these partnerships count very much on stakeholders that are present in the room, but they also count on being able to be led by governments, civil society, small and medium enterprises, and private sector partners, including the development finance institutions, coming together at the national level in a coordinated way to create both opportunities for demand of the types of resources that meet their needs and the supply at the right time to the right constituents to create the meaningful change that's needed to have both food systems transformation, ending all forms of malnutrition, and the possibility for both healthier life and healthier planet. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. And I'm really excited by the opportunities of what we can do together to take much of this work forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Afshan, for your inspiring concluding remarks. And I will not attempt to summarize anything because I think it was very well said. And indeed, we need to work together and continue this very important dialogue. So, dear participants, the next event is about to start. There will be no break. So we'll just kindly ask you to stay in the room as we prepare for the next session. Thank you.